Okay, in this video we're going to talk a little bit about the code that you're going to be writing, and just the weirdest thing that you have to wrap your mind around when you're moving from Java to Flash is that the frames have an effect on when the code will run. So we never had to worry about this one with Java. We just wrote code and it ran. But the code, with Flash, you have to get used to kind of predicting when the code is going to get executed, and when it's going to get executed depends on what frame it's on and when that frame gets played, etc., etc. So, let me show you some weird little example. Here we've got the main timeline has one frame, very simple. On this main timeline with one frame, we have this one little movie clip. When I go into this movie clip, so I just entered the brain of the star also has one frame. So the main timeline has one frame, the star has one frame. Now this is what kids do to me all the time. They put a code layer here, and on this code layer they say, I would really like for something to happen. I want him to teleport. Now, if you do this, here's what's strange. This code will only execute when the star hits frame 1. The star will only hit frame 1 one time. So when you run this, that teleportation that you thought was so amazing happened one time. That wasn't so amazing. Teleported off the screen at time. Awesome. So that teleportation happens exactly one time, and that's because it's when the star hits frame 1, which only happens once. Now, let me show you something a little weirder. I'm going to make a key. I'm just going to fancy up this star a little bit. So this star has a keyframe on frame 1, some filler frames, and then on frame 2. And just so we can tell the difference, I'm going to say on frame 10. On this frame, let's make this star turn red. So, now, here's what's strange. It doesn't look like it, but the way this is written, all of these frames are going to be kind of playing on an infinite loop. It's going to go frame 1, and when it gets to frame 15, it comes back to frame 1. So, just so you can see an example, I'm going to trace out that. And by the way, I don't think I've ever told you this, but current frame is a variable that every movie clip has that keeps track of that, tells you what frame it's on, little c, big F. What that'll tell you, that's how you ask a movie clip what frame he's currently on. Now, all of this code is on frame 1, so every time the star hits frame 1, it's going to execute this code. Now that there are some frames to play through, you'll notice that it's happening, that stuff is happening here. You're printing frame 1, and you're landing on frame 1 repeatedly. You're landing on frame 1 repeatedly because now this star is in an infinite loop playing through his frames. Now, just for fun, on frame 15, I'm going to put another keyframe. So on frame 1, you have that code. When you hit frame 1, or on, frame 15, very nice. So now you'll notice that I hit frame 1, I hit frame 15, I hit frame 1 again, and the teleport code is happening on frame 1 over and over and over again. Now, that's great, except sometimes you want to force something to happen repeatedly without having to play through this loop. So you may just want, right now you're depending on playing through the loop to get back to that code that makes them teleport. That may or may not be what you want to do, because you might want some control over what that star is doing or how it looks. So if you throw in a stop on frame 1, and then depending on what kind of program you get going on, when you throw in that stop, you'll notice this star only hits frame one time. It only hits frame one time because as soon as it got to frame 1, it stopped. It did this, teleported, done. It never came back to frame 1 for any reason. So, if you have some instance where you need to stop it, but you still want something to happen repeatedly, don't forget about, alien events. You did this with alien events. You could say, the interframe event, I think it's a weird name, because the interframe event gets called every frame, but even if you're not playing through the frames, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to do that either. What's it doing here? Get out of my way. It's going to get called, the interframe event gets called 24 times per second, 24 frames per second. So this interframe event doesn't really, it's a different kind of frame than the frame 1 and frame 15. It's going to get called based on your frame rate. But it will allow you to have some animation. Now, so you did this in alien events, so you're familiar with it. It's beautiful. Now, what we've got here is this function. Each frame gets called 24 times a second because it's attached to the interframe event. So you're going to stop on the frame 1. You're going to say, okay, I want to hook that up to each frame event, and then this is going to keep getting repeatedly called every 1/24th of a second. Now it's going to be a little crazy. Now notice, you're never getting to the red star because that star is always on frame 1. And it's just always on frame 1, never moving off of frame 1. Very nice, but 24 times a second, it's going to call that each frame. Now, also just FYI, that's a little intense. You could change the frame rate if you want. You could also do something a little crazy. Now, this function's still getting called 24 times a second, so you'll see that weird hey, but it's ran 24 times a second. It's making a decision about should it teleport, should it not teleport, should it teleport, should it not teleport, making up its mind. Awesome. Now, but it's still, the interframe of it was getting called 1,000 times, but it was still on frame 1. Now, you may want some kind of weird. Now here's what's weird. I'm going to put a little trace statement to show you that you're setting up this each frame listener. Now, if you said, I want to teleport, and you know how there's a stop function? FYI, there's a play function. Now, gorgeous. Look how pretty that is. It's going to teleport and play through its redness and come back to its blueness. Now, the only crappy thing is, it's going to, that setup, adding the event listener, and this is weird, is getting called more than one time because you're eventually looping back to frame 1. So that setup where you're adding the event listener, you really probably don't want to add that event listener more than once, but now once you're allowed to play through, you loop back and add it again, and you add it again, and you add it again. So you're actually adding this event listener multiple times. That's probably not what you want. So now this is crazy, and I didn't show you this in Alien Event, but you could do it. In Alien Event, we wrote the setup function and called it from the main timeline like a constructor, but you could also do this. Sorry. You could say this setting up business should be a function. Now the problem is we don't want that function to get called repeatedly. So what we could do is say, and it's almost like a constructor, call the setup function only when things get activated, which is the very beginning. And so that way, when things get activated, it calls setup, which adds the event listener once, and then this event listener gets going. So that's almost like setting up a constructor. That's a constructor that gets things going. You say only call it this one time, and then when you get that rigged up, like you've still got the star in his interframe and he's playing through, but you'll notice that there's only one time that setup got called. But moral of this story, if you want something to happen repeatedly, you probably want to attach it to an interframe event. Don't just set it on the frame. If you set that code on the frame just sitting there, it's probably not going to run repeatedly. Or it'll only run when you hit that frame. If you stop on that frame, you only hit the frame one time. It only runs one time. So the each frame event is beautiful. It gets called repeatedly on regular intervals. But you may not want to rig that. You only want to add that event listener once, so you could put that in almost like a constructor that gets called when everything is activated, and then you've got something beautiful. So just make sure you understand the difference. If you put the code on the frame, then it's at the mercy of when you touch the frame or when you play through that frame. But if you attach it to an each frame event, it's going to get called on a regular interval depending on your frame rate. So make sure you understand those differences because it might be important to your WhacAMole program.